For 3 years, investigators follow a trail of phony money.
$3.
The fake bills appear a few at a time in cities across the United States. As the frequency of the passes increases, Secret Service agents struggle to try and capture one of America's most notorious counterfeiters. The case takes a bizarre twist when investigators uncover evidence revealing still darker crimes. As the counterfeiting case becomes more sinister, agents must confront their suspect's depraved legacy. Haunted by sadistic trophies, agents begin a terrifying search for the lives shattered by one man's cruel deception. In this program, some of the names have been changed. In Charlotte, North Carolina, in April of 1983, an armored truck drove up to a local bank to make its daily deposit. The courier was delivering the day's receipts from an area mall.
Morning, ma'am.
Hi, Jack. Come on in.
Morning, buzzes.
Big deposit today, huh?
Absolutely. Thank you very
All
much.
right, there you
Thank
go.
you very much.
Thank
Have a
you.
good
See
day.
you tomorrow.
Most banks in the U.S. use automatic counters calibrated to reject any bills that are an odd size or paper thickness. The machine rejected one of the notes. A worn-looking $20 bill. Suspecting it may be counterfeit, the clerk contacted the nearest office of the Secret Service.
Hi, I would like to report.
Although it is known for providing protection to the president, the Secret Service was originally founded to investigate counterfeit currency. An agent was dispatched to the bank to try and determine where the bill came from. The Secret Service canvassed the mall to determine if any of the retailers could identify the passer. Agents interviewed employees throughout the mall where the bill had been passed.
Need to talk to you about that. Try to pass this.
The cashiers couldn't recall who had passed the fake bill. Special Agent Dennis Foose worked the case.
In many cases, counterfeit bills will be received by a merchant, not detected as counterfeit, go into the till, and might be given back to the next customer in the form of change. So it's not uncommon for someone to innocently pick up a counterfeit bill and then even pass it on to another merchant.
The Secret Service sent the counterfeit $20 note to their forensics lab in Washington, D.C. Lorelei Pagano is a counterfeit specialist. It is her job to analyze the counterfeit notes.
They're examined for information about the paper, the printing process, the inks, any simulation of security features, any investigative information that we can give back to the field to help them stop the counterfeiting.
The examiner focused her attention on the style of printing. The counterfeit bill was flat and slick. The printing process of the U.S. Mint creates raised areas on the bill where the ink is applied. The U.S. Treasury has a series of safeguards to discourage counterfeiting. In the 1980s, the paper they printed on was embedded with red and blue fibers. This counterfeiter had printed red and blue lines on the bills to simulate the look of the paper. Comparing the bill to previously passed notes, the technician noticed these defects were similar to others she had seen.
We associate notes together by determining if there's significant individuality of two portions of a note that allows us to define that they're coming from the same counterfeiting operation. And in that sense, we then create families of counterfeits.
This family of counterfeit bills began appearing in the early 1980s and were cataloged under Circular 7215. This was the 7,215th run of counterfeit bills in U.S. history. Agents telexed a notice to branch offices around the country. Since 1980, the Secret Service had recovered more than 1,000 variations of Circular 7215.
That'll be $1.95 for you.
The counterfeit bills had been passed for the most part in shopping malls. Because of this, they dubbed their suspect the mall passer. The agents had very little information about their suspect. They didn't know if he was working alone or if he was part of a counterfeit ring. All they knew for certain was that his fake $20 bills had defrauded the U.S. out of thousands of dollars.
Thank you. You too.
Greg Mertz, a former homicide detective, had been with the Secret Service only a year and a half when he began investigating the case.
The counterfeit money he produced was a fairly good quality note. I mean, it passed. If that's your standard or your barometer as to how good a counterfeit bill is, can it pass on the general public? The majority of the bills did pass.
For years, the Secret Service struggled to find a lead. Thousands of dollars in counterfeit 20s with the same telltale flaws had turned up in malls all across the country. Secret Service agent Jane Vizeris worked the case.
A particular area would be hit by this note, and you would see that there was a 20 passed in a bookstore, and then a 20 passed in a stationery store, and then maybe 20 passed, you know, in a small area, but not large numbers. And it was over a long span of time, and it was over a large geographic area of this country. And that was peculiar.
To the agents, the passer's odd behavior made it seem as if his counterfeiting was hiding something else. Then they got a break.
$3.
A clerk in Burnside, Minnesota, took in a $20 bill that didn't feel right to her. She suspected it was fake. The clerk observed the passer as he got into his car and drove away. She later gave the Secret Service their first description of the suspect. She also described his car as a white Ford, but was unable to read the license plate. The Secret Service distributed a sketch based on the clerk's description to shopping malls all across America.
We established that he had visited every state east of the Mississippi River and many states west of the Mississippi River, and would hit malls, shopping malls, generally during weekends or busy periods. Holiday weekends were a favorite.
The mall passer always made small purchases. He would buy a pair of socks, a book, or a single greeting card.
Out of 20?
He passed his bills 120 at a time, collecting his change and moving on. He never went for the big score. He was patient and methodical. The Secret Service was puzzled by the mall passer's mobility. He would drop a bill in Florida, and the very same day, a dozen fake 20s would appear 500 miles away. They weren't certain whether his fake bills were in circulation or whether he was in fact passing them. If he was, they thought he might be someone who traveled for a living.
We started with a notion that because of the distances that the passes occurred from each other, that one possibility might be that the notes were being passed by a pilot.
One of the mall passer's counterfeit bills turned up at a parking lot near an airport in Washington, D.C.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
The Secret Service got a description of the passer from the parking lot attendant. A similar note had been passed in that lot exactly 1 year before. The next day, agents showed a composite drawing of their suspect to a ground crew who identified him as a pilot. Airline officials provided a picture.
I laid the composite next to the photograph of their pilot and got a little excited because it appeared that the composite drawing could have been traced from that very picture.
The Secret Service followed the pilot to see if he was passing fake bills. They surveilled him in and out of airports.
Hey there, how are you?
There you go. That's 345. Change.
When they saw him spending money, they would retrieve the bill to see if it was counterfeit.
Secret Service agents, I'd like to take a look at the bill that the last customer just used, please.
They also checked his flight record.
Thank you.
His assignments had not taken him near any of the counterfeit passes. They concluded he could not be the mall passer. The investigators hit a dead end.
When you look at the total dollar amount that this individual was passing, it was insignificant compared to the total amount of counterfeit passed in the country or the world. However, this one individual was beating the Secret Service year after year for 3 years straight.
Investigators observed that the mall passer often traveled Interstate 95 up and down the eastern United States. He would take smaller routes, but he always returned to 95. Agents began to suspect that he made his home in the Washington, D.C. area. If so, he was right under their noses. In May of 1983, as the Memorial Day holiday approached, they anticipated his passing would intensify.
We went out and hit various malls showing our composite and alerting them to the possibility that the mall passer might be hitting during that time frame. We not only did that in Washington, D.C., but we set up sort of a band that would cover these common routes that we knew that he took, which extended across to Tennessee.
The Secret Service contacted thousands of stores up and down the East Coast. A report came in from the Knoxville office that a phony bill had been passed at a shop in Kingsport, Tennessee. The Secret Service confirmed it came from the mall passer.
Sure.
If the predictions of his travel patterns held true, Knoxville would be next. Agents at the local field office were dispatched to cover the newly opened mall.
Pete Allison, Secret Service.
They went to every shop, showing clerks a photograph of the sketch they had made of the mall passer.
Tell me if you've seen this gentleman. I know that guy.
Agent Pete Allison remembers the manager of one of the shops recognized the picture.
The clerk felt like he would know this person because he had been shown this photograph before in Memphis. The person victimized him at his store in Memphis. And he told me that he would, if this person walked in the store, he would recognize him immediately.
Thank you.
Incredibly, a few minutes after the agent left, the mall passer entered the shop. Agents finally got the break they had been waiting for when the clerk reported seeing the passer.
Suspect spotted outside mall. Respond immediately. Over.
All right. Allison, I'm on the way.
The clerk told agents he had seen the suspect enter a bookstore nearby. A security officer checked out the bookstore, but the mall passer was not there. Then they spotted him, coming out of a shoe store.
Stay here.
Aware he was being followed, he began running toward a store that was under construction. 2 police officers pulled up outside the unfinished area where the mall passer had disappeared. The suspect tried to bluff his way past the officers by telling them that the police had already cleared him to leave. The officers didn't believe him.
That's it. Hold on. Don't worry. He's not going anywhere. I need to step up to the car real quick.
They searched him and found a gun in his front pocket. They also found some counterfeit money. It matched the bill passed at the shop. After years of searching, they knew they finally had the mall passer. They questioned the suspect to see if his car was nearby. He continued to deny having a car, but again, the agents did not believe him.
If this is a guy who's been driving all over the country, there could be all kinds of evidence in that car of his other passes.
Investigators waited until nightfall to check the mall for unattended vehicles. Only 3 cars were left in the lot. The mall passer's keys fit one of them, a 1971 Chrysler. The agent closed the vehicle and sought a search warrant. The next morning, the suspect's car was towed to an impound garage where police began processing it. The car had been equipped with a police siren. Inside the trunk, they found more police paraphernalia. What appeared to be stolen license plates and a collection of women's underwear. The investigators began to suspect that there was more to the mall passer than simply passing fake bills. After tracking the mall passer for years, the Secret Service finally had him in custody in Knoxville, Tennessee. He had been arrested after passing a fake 20 in a local mall. Agents searched the mall passer's car. As they did, they uncovered disturbing evidence. The car was outfitted with a police siren and police lights. Inside, agents recovered a loaded semi-automatic pistol. The search turned up thousands of dollars in counterfeit currency in small bundles. Each bundle was labeled with the name of a different city. An itinerary found above the visor listed various dates, cities and aliases used, motels and how much money was spent. The counterfeiter had kept meticulous records of his travels. In the trunk, they found a stack of stolen license plates, some with magnets attached. They also found other items that surprised Special Agent Allison.
These stolen tags with the magnets on them, those were fairly normal for a counterfeiter to try to hide his identification, to get away. But then the police lights, the police badges that we found, the police siren and the spotlight in the front of the car, we suspected then that we had a police impersonator. But we had no idea why.
The trunk contained several forged driver's licenses, all of them bearing the suspect's picture.
As we were searching the car, I thought that we were looking for counterfeit evidence. And the more we found, the more I realized this guy must be into something else besides counterfeiting.
Is your real name Roger Colin Blanchard?
At the Secret Service office, agents interviewed the suspect to obtain his personal history. At the time of his arrest, he was carrying a North Carolina driver's license in the name of Roger Colin Blanchard.
We've got your fingerprints.
When he told them his birth date, it was different than the date on his driver's license.
The month was the same, the year was the same, but the day was different. So I reasoned then that there's something not right here.
Checking the address on the driver's license, agents found it belonged to a motel. The management of the motel said they had never heard of a Roger Colin Blanchard.
Agent Roberts.
Agents in Tennessee contacted the Washington, D.C. field office. The car's license plates had been stolen, but the vehicle was registered to a James R. Jones of Alexandria, Virginia. Special Agent Greg Mertz discovered that Jones had also registered the vehicle in Albany, New York. Jones had the same height, weight, and birth date as Blanchard.
Well, I called back down to Knoxville and I said, hey, I don't think this guy's name is Roger Collins Blanchard. I think his real name is James R. Jones. And I said, why don't you FedEx his fingerprints up and we'll hand carry him to the Bureau the next morning and try to get a true identification on the guy.
A search of the FBI's records uncovered the mall passer's identity. He was James Mitchell Debardeleben II, a 44-year-old career criminal. He had been arrested by the Secret Service years earlier in 1976 for passing counterfeit $100 bills. Special Agent Foose pulled up the report and realized the investigating agents still worked in the Secret Service's Washington field office.
Passing counterfeit bills.
When Foose showed Special Agent Mike Stevens Debardeleben's new arrest photo, Stevens recognized him instantly.
Went in and searched his apartment.
I knew Foose was working the mall passer case. And then he told me that he had been arrested in Knoxville, Tennessee as a mall passer. Well, naturally, I got a lump in my throat, and I said, certainly I do remember him. I immediately wanted a piece of this new investigation because I knew probably more about him than most people.
Stevens briefed Foose on what they found when they first arrested Debardeleben. The morning after Debardeleben's 1976 arrest, agents obtained a warrant to search his residence. They were looking for his printing press. On the second floor, they entered a darkened bedroom.
And we hit a light switch to turn the light on. And immediately, a movie projector came on and projected pornography on the wall. It frightened us a little bit because it startled us, because we don't know exactly what we're getting into.
All around them was amateur pornography. Much of it involved torture and bondage scenarios. The agents found a stack of index cards with the names of women, their addresses, and descriptions of their physical attributes. It appeared the cards included a crude rating system. Under the pillows, they found a .38 caliber revolver and a 9mm automatic pistol.
Let me check them and see.
Both weapons were loaded. Stevens went on to tell the agents that during the 1976 search of Debardeleben's home, they discovered the second locked bedroom. Using a sledgehammer, they smashed the door.
And there was the printing press operation, the 1250 multilith, which was a surprise to us because it's very heavy, and it was a surprise that it was up on the second floor. Money was strewed all over the floor of the room.
Stevens told the agents Debardeleben served only 23 months for his prior 1976 counterfeiting conviction. Special Agent Stevens always felt there was more to Debardeleben than counterfeiting.
We had him arrested now in Knoxville, and he was using various different aliases. I think we ended up with about 40 different aliases that he used.
Investigators now had to find out what he had been doing since his release. They set out to learn everything they could about James Mitchell Debardeleben. After a 3-year search, Secret Service agents in Tennessee finally apprehended the mall passer. But they still found no clues as to where he kept his printing press and supplies. On the windshield of his car, they noticed a parking sticker for an apartment complex in Alexandria, Virginia. Agents from the Washington, D.C. office were dispatched to check out the apartment. It was only 15 miles from the Secret Service office. Agent Jane Vizeris worked the case.
We became actively involved in trying to figure out what activities was he involved in here. Perhaps, was this his home base? Was he actually manufacturing the notes here? Did he have a stash of counterfeit notes here?
Residents of the apartment building recognized Debardeleben's picture and said they knew him as James Jones. The agents learned which unit was his. They secured a warrant. When Special Agent Mertz entered the apartment, his hopes sank.
It was a one-bedroom apartment, kitchen, living room, small, maybe 800-900 square feet total. And we realized immediately upon walking in that our investigation was going to continue because we had not discovered the planned operation.
Debardeleben had learned from his 1976 arrest. He no longer kept his printing press in his home. The agents searched the apartment but found nothing unusual, except for a large quantity of men's socks.
We looked around. We found a number of small bags with small purchases. Maybe a pair of socks, a book, maybe a map, those kinds of little things, which was very typical with the kind of behavior that was exhibited by this individual, because he would go in, of course, and try to buy a very small dollar item with a 20 to get the maximum amount of change possible.
The puzzling thing to the agents was that although it appeared Debardeleben had no use for any of the items he bought, he kept them. It seemed as if they were trophies of his crimes. The Secret Service had Debardeleben in custody, but unless they could find his printing press, they couldn't charge him with manufacturing counterfeit bills.
Here was a 3.5-year investigation that had the attention of the entire Secret Service. And we were expecting to find a large amount of counterfeit money. We're expecting to find, or hoping to find, a printing plant operation with a printing press and printing plate negatives and plates, and we found nothing.
Just keep doing the 360.
The sentence for passing was much lighter than the sentence for manufacturing. They had to find the press. Agent Mertz had an idea.
I leafed through every single page of the white pages, Northern Virginia. It was 3 inches thick, looking for any marks, any names that might be circled, anything of the nature like that. I then started with the yellow pages and went to every single page in the yellow pages. When I got to the M's, In the yellow pages, under moving and storage, there was a small piece of paper.
American movers and storage.
We both kind of looked at each other, and we knew that's where it was. He had everything in a moving and storage locker.
They decided to canvass storage facilities in Alexandria, Virginia, starting with the one nearest Debardeleben's apartment.
I, being somewhat familiar with that location, knew that there were several storage units in the area within a few blocks of the apartment. So my function was to visit each of these storage units and attempt to determine whether this person that we had now identified as James Debardeleben had rented any units in any of these storage units. As it turned out, the first storage unit that I went to got a hit.
The clerk told the agents she had been waiting for them.
As a matter of fact, her comment to me was, I was sort of wondering when the police would come by and ask about this guy.
It's right here.
One of their renters, a man named Jones, was up to no good, she said.
It's creepy.
The clerk remembered. One night, Jones left his locker open with the light on.
Lock-picking tools.
When she went to shut it off, she saw what she thought were burglary tools.
Locked up one home.
Person here.
When shown Debardeleben's picture, the clerk identified him as
Yeah, that's
Jones.
Mr. Jones. This man.
Go get a warrant, call for backup.
Investigators believe they may have found Debardeleben's printing plant. They obtained a search warrant and returned to the storage locker. When they opened it, they were surprised to find that it did not contain the printing press. Nothing about this investigation was easy.
The very first thing that struck me when we opened the door was a set of red lights and blue lights and a siren, all designed with cigarette lighter plugs to operate off of a car cigarette lighter.
The locker was filled with the same type of items found in Debardeleben's car, only on a much bigger scale. The agents recovered box after box of counterfeit $20 bills. Almost $50,000 worth.
We did find what we were looking for as far as evidence of counterfeiting. We found counterfeit money, we found plates and negatives, but we also found items that led us to believe that we were looking at evidence of other crimes.
The storage locker contained more phony police badges, fake identity cards, books on surveillance, and a number of weapons.
It appeared that he was a police impersonator. The question is why? Why was he a police impersonator? We thought he was just passing counterfeit money. So we started thinking real hard, like, what do we have here?
As agents confiscated the evidence, they knew counterfeiting was the least of Debardeleben's crimes. The disturbing thing was, whatever he was doing it full time. They took the evidence back to their offices to be processed. They hoped the boxes held something that would give them some idea of what he was doing. Special Agent Mertz began by reading some of the hundreds of Debardeleben's notes stored in the boxes.
He was a prolific note writer. He'd get up in the morning and say, what are the 5 things I have to do today? And he'd write them down. And so there were little tiny slips of paper, 3x5 cards, little Post-it notes, so you name it.
Late into the night, agents cataloged the evidence. Unfortunately, Debardeleben's notes offered no clues as to the whereabouts of his press. Agent Mertz discovered some audio tapes inside one of the boxes. He decided to play one of them.
I thought, well, maybe since he's such a prolific note writer, maybe there's something, you know, he's so secretive, maybe there's something on this tape. So I took the tape and I just stuck it in my dictaphone player and I hit play.
You gonna be a crybaby, huh?
I was shocked. Debardeleben's tone in his voice was very matter-of-fact, totally calm and control, and this woman is screaming, begging to be killed. And I listened to 2 or 3 minutes. I stopped the tape and I just sat there and listened. I'm going, what did I just hear?
Later that day, Mertz played the tape for the other agents.
You could hear a woman screaming, crying, pleading for him to stop. It was extremely unsettling. I can't find words to adequately describe how terrible it was.
The agents knew there was more to the case. They could only speculate as to the terror Debardeleben inflicted on these women. The Secret Service was sifting through evidence found in a storage locker rented to James Mitchell Debardeleben. They had caught him passing fake bills, which they suspected he had printed himself. They still had not found his press, but had uncovered a chilling audio tape in which a woman was begging to be killed. Evidence Debardeleben was involved in something far more sinister. Desperate to find out exactly what Debardeleben was involved in, agents continued to pore over the evidence. They recovered hundreds of receipts from the storage locker.
Yeah, this is it.
A few of them from other storage facilities. Special Agent Greg Mertz found a telling piece of evidence.
One of the significant things that I found was a postal money order receipt made out to a moving and storage facility in Manassas, Virginia.
The manager of the facility said she was leasing a locker to a J.R. Jones who worked for an electronics company. Jones was one of Debardeleben's aliases. Special Agent Mike Stevens again obtained a search warrant.
We found a storage unit and took the lock off it and opened it up. And as I recall, the Manassas storage unit was what we would call the mother lode.
Agents opened the locker to find at last Debardeleben's printing plant. A multi-lith 1250 offset press. Weighing almost 500 pounds, it was partly dismantled and surrounded by nearly $250,000 in fake $20 bills. Inside the locker, agents found a small arsenal of handguns and knives. The search also turned up what the agents called kits. They consisted of medical tape, pieces of rope, and lubricating jelly. As they looked farther, agents made a disturbing discovery. Photographs of women in sexually compromising positions. Hundreds of photographs. Some of the women had ligature marks on their wrists and tape residue around their eyes, indicating they had been tied up and blindfolded.
We became very alarmed when we saw the police equipment and the pornography, which included photographs, not professionally done, but photographs, home photographs, if you will, of naked women, and there was a lot of it. And from the photographs, I mean, you really couldn't tell if these were willing partners or not. But when you put the whole thing together, the entire context of what you found, it did not give you a good feeling.
The locker's contents were moved to the Washington field office. The storage units had yielded 144 boxes of potential evidence.
We had literally a mountain full of material. We had 30, 40 road maps, and some of them would have an X marked somewhere on the map, almost like a treasure map. We had women's clothing, women's underwear. We had women's little trinkets of jewelry. We had the police equipment. We had multiple license plates from various states. that obviously had been stolen.
Agents also recovered a number of women's driver's licenses and nearly 100 pairs of women's underwear. Some of them new, some looked worn. The Secret Service was organized to combat counterfeiting. They were not equipped to investigate the type of evidence they were finding.
The Secret Service, as part of the Treasury Department, for the most part, our criminal investigations are financial investigations.
Secret Service agent Jane Vizeris contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
They indicated that you really don't have anything at this point. I mean, you don't have any evidence. I mean, if you came to us and said, you know, here, this was used in a homicide, well, maybe, or a kidnap case, you know, maybe they could do something with it. But we really did, we just had our suspicion, and we had this mountain of material.
Because the Secret Service could not specifically identify any victims, the FBI could not pursue the case. The Secret Service knew if they didn't investigate this case, no one else could.
It was extremely unusual and awkward because typically you have a crime and you solve the crime. Here, we believed we were looking at a lot of evidence, but we had no clue what the crime was, or where the crime occurred, or when the crime occurred. But we all had very strong convictions that certainly crimes had occurred.
Believe me.
The agents approached the assistant director about having the Secret Service investigate the case themselves. As they played one of the tapes, John Simpson, the director of the Secret Service, walked in.
Upon listening to the tapes, we heard some pretty chilling recordings of women being tortured, of women screaming, of women begging to be killed.
The director listened for a minute, shocked by what he heard on the tape. Simpson gave the investigation his full support.
I don't think I'd ever been more proud of my agency than at that moment when our director supported our refusal to let this case just fade away.
Give them anything they need.
The Secret Service was given clearance to expand their investigation beyond counterfeiting.
At this point, the investigation took a complete turn from our concerns over the counterfeiting to the concerns of these vicious crimes.
Their first task was to try and understand what they had. They cataloged each of the more than 10,000 bits of potential evidence. Receipts, newspaper clippings, photographs, letters, postage stamp marks, anything that might eventually be a clue.
It didn't take a whole lot of experience to determine that this person was involved in a multitude of criminal activity. We didn't know who the victims were, we didn't know exactly what, but we knew this was not a normal counterfeit case. We realized that we had a lot of work in front of us.
Once they had everything at their fingertips, they hoped clues would emerge as to the extent of Debardeleben's crimes. For years, the Secret Service tracked a counterfeiter through over 30 states. When they finally arrested James Mitchell Debardeleben, agents found a storage locker that held evidence of more sinister crimes. They began to piece together the mountain of evidence found in Debardeleben's storage lockers. They wanted to find out exactly what they had. Special Agent Jane Vizeris supervised the effort.
All we wanted to do was to be able to identify what we had in a coherent manner so that we could try to coordinate this with the rest of the law enforcement community to see if it somehow matched any of the unsolved cases that they may have had. One of the aspects of what we did early on was to try as quickly as we could assess what we thought he might have committed. And we did that by, of course, looking at the totality of the evidence we had, but also he was an incessant note taker.
Through his meticulous record-taking, including the notes and the receipts he kept, agents were able to make a timeline of Debardeleben's travels. They also used the notes to better understand the type of person Debardeleben was.
He had lots of notes, handwritten notes that he wrote about himself, about how to make himself appear more presentable, more attractive to women, how to make himself appear more important, sitting in a bar, how he should sit, how he should look, what he should say, all of those kinds of things.
Special Agent Mertz discovered Debardeleben made lists of objectives.
He also wrote pages and pages of goals of what he wanted to do. The type of women he would like, the type of torture he wanted to inflict on women.
Debardeleben's to-do lists outlined how he would accomplish each thing. He wrote about equipping his car with a hinged license plate that could be flipped up or down from inside the car. Eye bolts on the floor of the vehicle and in the trunk. He made reminders to install soundproofing, security buzzers, and alarms to his house. He wanted hidden compartments, a secret area where he could keep women locked up. Debardeleben had even outlined the most opportune time to kidnap a woman. The level of detail was chilling. Some of his notes were easily understood, while others seemed to have been written in code.
He had little initials like, KRK, those kinds of things, which in our mind we thought meant perhaps kidnap, rape, kill. And he had notes to himself about, first of all, he thought he was very smart and that cops were stupid and that he would never be caught because he was smarter than us.
As agents looked over the notes, they feared the photographs found in Debardeleben's lockers were proof he had acted on his plans. The agents found hundreds of photographs of nude women engaged in sadistic sex.
Several of them appeared they had been in some act of being bound up or had ligature marks. You could see bright red rings around their wrist.
Debardeleben appeared to have posed many of his victims. Some of the pictures appeared as if they had been taken over a period of days. The victims, all of them women, seemed to grow more disheveled and hollow-eyed with each shot. Investigators had no idea what had happened to these women. On the next FBI files,
Open the register. Now.
As federal agents learn more about James Mitchell Debardeleben, they must confront the horrors he committed and begin a desperate search for his victims. For 3 years, investigators follow a trail of phony money.
$3.
The fake bills appear a few at a time in cities across the United States. As the frequency of the passes increases, Secret Service agents struggle to try and capture one of America's most notorious counterfeiters. The case takes a bizarre twist when investigators uncover evidence revealing still darker crimes. As the counterfeiting case becomes more sinister, agents must confront their suspect's depraved legacy. Haunted by sadistic trophies, agents begin a terrifying search for the lives shattered by one man's cruel deception. In this program, some of the names have been changed. For years, the Secret Service tracked a counterfeiter through over 30 states. The agents had very little information about their suspect. They didn't know if he was working alone or if he was part of a counterfeit ring. All they knew for certain was that his fake $20 bills had defrauded the U.S. out of thousands of dollars.
Thank you. You too.
They got a break when James Mitchell Debardeleben was captured passing a bill in Knoxville, Tennessee. After his arrest, agents linked Debardeleben to a storage locker that held evidence of more sinister crimes. Inside the unit, they found hundreds of photographs of nude women engaged in sadistic sex and audio-taped accounts of women being tortured. One woman was begging to be killed.
You gonna be a crybaby? Huh?
The Secret Service knew they were dealing with a sexual predator. To better understand their suspect, they sought help from the Behavioral Sciences Unit at the FBI, according to Agent Jane Vizeris.
We went to the Behavioral Science Unit to ask for their assistance, to see if they could provide any better insight as to what he may have done, so that we could be more informative to our officers who were liaisoning with law enforcement around the country.
Working out of Quantico, Virginia, the Behavioral Science Unit studied Debardeleben's notes, tapes, photos, and other souvenirs. Retired FBI Special Agent Roy Hazelwood is an expert in profiling the criminal mind.
The Secret Service obviously understood that Debardeleben was involved in sexually violent crimes. They understood that because of tape recordings they'd listened to. They understood it because of photographs that they had the opportunity to observe. They saw the fantastic amount of pornography this man had not only collected but had created himself, both verbal and in written form, as well as visual forms. So they knew that he was involved in sexual crimes. They were specifically interested in my input on the types of sexual crimes and a little bit more of what made Debardeleben tick.
Hazelwood looked into Debardeleben's background for clues to his personality. He found that the counterfeiter had a criminal record.
I learned that at age 16 he was arrested for carrying a concealed weapon. I learned that he was a very assaultive type of person, a very abusive person toward his parents, for example.
Hazelwood believed Debardeleben was attracted to counterfeiting, partly because of the risk.
To be able to walk up to a person and con them out of real money and merchandise and give them phony money and walk away, and they can't identify you. Why? Because they're not paying any attention to you. You're just one of hundreds of customers that come in here and buy a pair of socks in a given day, you see? So the risk is also part of the thrill for him.
Hazelwood examined the notes Debardeleben had written. The descriptions of torture pointed to an obsession with inflicting pain on women. Hazelwood concluded Debardeleben was a sexual sadist.
A sexual sadist is an individual who is aroused by the suffering of another person. It is not the infliction of pain. The sexual sadist uses pain as a tool to elicit the suffering. The suffering is the goal.
If Hazelwood's assessment was accurate, hundreds of women may have suffered at the hands of Debardeleben. His notes indicated he planned and outlined every aspect of his proposed crimes against women. In fact, every aspect of his life was devoted to his sadistic behavior.
He wanted to buy a house that had a basement with an incinerator and a sadistic play area. I mean, even buying a house, the type of car he had, it had to resemble a police car so he could stop somebody. The type of house he had so he could keep a woman in captivity. The money he had so that he could buy more materials that dealt with deviant sexuality. Every piece of the puzzle of his life went to making up this mosaic of sexually sadistic behavior. For example, the tape recordings. They were all geared to humiliation, degradation of his victims. That's certainly a characteristic of a sexual sadist. The photographs he took. The victims were nude, they were partially nude, they were forced to participate in sexual acts on themselves and on Debardeleben. That's certainly consistent. The fact that he wrote extensively on his plans, he had goals in life, and a lot of those goals pertained to criminal activities. He talked about, for example, obtaining new identification. That's certainly consistent with a sexual sadist. So I'm going to say that the most important part of my analysis was that the documentation, he was in fact a sexual sadist.
Even the tools he used in counterfeiting became part of his sexually sadistic behavior.
The camera equipment, certainly used in counterfeiting, definitely used in his sexual crimes. Enlargers, certainly used in counterfeiting, definitely used in his sexual crimes. So there was some overlap between the two types of materials that I looked at. He collected newspaper clippings on various types of crimes. Bank robberies, drug arrests, rapes, homicides, scams, extortions, any type of crime. And he would clip out the articles that pertained to them, and he would learn from those.
After studying Debardeleben's homemade pornography alongside the items found in the storage locker, Hazelwood confirmed the agent's fears that they had captured a sexual predator. What they still did not know were the extent of his crimes or the identities of his victims. The Secret Service was sifting through hundreds of pieces of evidence that all pointed to the fact that counterfeiter James Mitchell Debardeleben had committed more sinister crimes. The FBI's Behavioral Sciences Unit confirmed the Secret Service was dealing with a sexual predator. Judging from the quantity of photos found in Debardeleben's storage locker, he was a successful one. Agents knew sexual offenders often keep personal items from their victims as trophies. Debardeleben had collected the driver's licenses of nearly 20 young women. The Secret Service set out to find them. Agents located the first woman.
Well, I was at this bar.
She was a college student who told them she noticed her license was missing after a man tried to pick her up in a bar. She described him as a little creepy. He was thin and in his late 30s. When she got home, she found the contents of her purse had been rearranged.
My purse was with me, right next to me.
The only thing that was missing was her license. She said she never saw the man again.
Next to me.
One by one, the agents located the other women.
He could have gone into it.
All 20 were alive. They all told similar stories. None of them had been attacked. Agents were perplexed. The evidence in the notes pointed to larger crimes. The stolen licenses and detailed descriptions of women and car license plate numbers indicated Debardeleben went to great lengths to stalk women. The Secret Service couldn't find any victims. The agents couldn't quit searching. They had to do something with the information they found, especially the photos. They worried disseminating this evidence might violate the victim's privacy. Special Agent Vizeris felt the need for justice outweighed the risk.
One of the dilemmas of this case was that we had lots of photographs of nude women. And we didn't know if some of them were willing partners or not. It was clear from the photographs that a few of them were very young, probably in their early teens. Some of them looked like they had been crying, so our presumption is that some of these women were clearly not willing.
The Secret Service put together a photo spread showing just the victims' faces. Special Agent Mertz assembled a synopsis with fingerprints, photos, and a list of crimes they believed Debardeleben may have committed. They took all the information, along with the photo spread of victims, and sent it to law enforcement agencies around the country.
We tried to disseminate all this information to the police departments throughout the country to say, here's his MO, this is what he was doing. We think he recorded the rapes. We think he took pictures of his rape victims. He traveled in these states at these times based on the counterfeit note activity, based on the hotel receipts we found. Do any of the crimes in your particular police jurisdiction match this same MO?
They sent the information out. Now they would have to wait. It gave them time to take a closer look into Debardeleben's past. Agent Vizeris learned the counterfeiter had been married 5 times.
We located all 5 women to try to determine if any of them were involved in the counterfeiting activity. That was our initial interest. But then secondly, we wanted to get as much intelligence from them as we could to figure out what kinds of crimes he had committed and where he was, so we could help make these cases.
They spoke with several of his wives. They found one of them, Mary Ann, living in North Carolina. She would testify later to a grand jury, all that she had told the agents. She began by telling them she met Debardeleben in 1964. She said she was much younger than he was.
It was fun.
He was nice-looking, well-dressed, sophisticated, and he flattered her. She had never met anyone like him.
This is perfect. This is the one.
Journalist Stephen Michaud learned that when searching for a wife, Debardeleben targeted a specific type of woman.
They were very innocent, they knew very little about the wider world, and they were easily manipulated. Another important factor is they tended not to be too terribly self-assured.
All right, now you're going to help me with this.
Marianne said that Debardeleben gradually led her into posing nude for his camera.
Nothing wrong with it. It's a business. It's a job. Just going to do it. I don't
He eventually took pictures of them both engaged in various sex acts, many of which were sadistic in nature. Special Agent Stevens characterizes Debardeleben as a master manipulator.
We're going to make lots of money off of this.
The trick that he would use with all of his wives, as soon as he could, he would take compromising photographs of them that would degrade them. And then he would say to them, I've got these negatives, I've got these photographs. I'm going to send them to your mother. I'm going to send them to your father. All the time working them away from their families, owning them.
Photographs that we got.
Agents showed Marianne some of the sadistic photos they had found in Debardeleben's possession.
You might recognize these young ladies.
They wanted to know if she could identify any of the women in them. Marianne recognized the pictures had been taken in their home, but she couldn't identify the women. She said Debardeleben had shown her some photos like these in which he was abusing women sexually. When she threatened to go to the police, he tied her to the bed and performed sexual atrocities on her. He didn't just beat her up, said Marianne, but did things to her that they would not believe. To the agents, it was clear Marianne had been brutalized by Debardeleben. The Secret Service's determination only intensified to try and find his other victims. They feared if they did not, Debardeleben might only serve a few years and would soon be back on the streets, as he had been before. As the Secret Service built their counterfeiting case against James Mitchell Debardeleben, they uncovered disturbing evidence pointing to vicious crimes. A series of chilling handwritten notes outlined multiple crimes against women. Crimes he tape recorded. Investigators processed the evidence found in Debardeleben's storage locker and sent it to law enforcement agencies around the country. They hoped they could identify some of his victims. They knew if they didn't find any victims, they could only charge him with counterfeiting, and then he would be out on the streets after serving only a few years. While the Secret Service agents were waiting for information to come into their offices, they located another of Debardeleben's ex-wives, Linda. Investigators visited her at the store where she worked.
When we located her, she totally freaked out because when she saw our investigators, she thought that they were hitmen, that he had located her and sent them to kill her.
After the agents assured her they were not sent by her ex-husband, she agreed to come down to the local Secret Service office.
We wanted to talk to her not only about the counterfeit case, but also the possibility of him being involved in other criminal activity, focusing on violent crimes against women, anything that she might be able to help us with.
We need to get some
the first thing that she said was, "He'll kill me, he'll kill me, he'll kill me."
As she began to speak, the investigators who had heard the screams on Debardeleben's Linda tape suspected Debardeleben's ex-wife Linda was the woman on the tape.
Perhaps it's your husband.
The agents showed her the nude photos, but she couldn't identify any of the women. They asked her about Debardeleben's crimes.
When I asked her if he were involved in other criminal activity, or any sexual crimes, or any murder, she started to break down.
She told agents she came home one day to find Debardeleben with a young woman he had tied up.
He had kidnapped a woman and brought her into the house and held her captive and was torturing her. And he showed her this woman. And he says, "I want to kill her, and I want you to witness it."
Linda told the agent she talked Debardeleben out of killing the woman. He let her go, and Linda never saw her again. She said she was too afraid to go to the police. The agents were never able to corroborate her story. It has never been proven. She remembered he traveled a lot and would leave for long periods of time. When he returned, he always had stacks of cash.
I got this.
After the interview, Linda requested the agents leave her alone. She'd been trying to get over her past, she said, and needed to move on with her life. The agents were now more determined than ever to seek justice for the lives Debardeleben destroyed. It had been weeks since they disseminated the information about Debardeleben, and calls started coming in identifying him as a possible suspect in many unsolved crimes.
After we started disseminating the information, police departments started calling us and saying, well, I've got a crime similar to this, you know, what about this? Can you associate Debardeleben to being in my particular city in this time frame?
They had evidence that seemed to point to his involvement in nearly 200 crimes. As each call came in, the agents checked their database. Sometimes they could eliminate Debardeleben based on their receipts because he was thousands of miles away on that date. Other times they were able to place him in the vicinity shortly before or after the crime. One of the calls that came in was from the Prince William County Police Department in Manassas, Virginia. Don Cahill, a senior investigator, learned of the case through the Secret Service flyer. He thought Debardeleben might be the man who posed as a police officer and sexually assaulted a local woman 2.5 years earlier. Detective Cahill contacted the Secret Service and forwarded his report of the assault to their headquarters in Washington. The agents checked the information against their database and told Detective Cahill that Debardeleben was a possible suspect.
We could place him in the area at that time. We have receipts found in a storage area that put him in Manassas during that same period of time.
Did he show you a badge?
Now that they had a suspect, detectives from Prince William County contacted the victim, Lori Cobert. Cobert was on her way home when she noticed some lights in her rearview mirror. It appeared she was being followed by an unmarked police car. Colbert recalled the harrowing night of February 5th, 1981.
I pulled over, figuring the car was going to pass me, because I knew I wasn't speeding. When I pulled in behind me, I thought, what am I being pulled over for? I remember him asking for my driver's license and my registration. And he walked back to his car, and I was watching him in my rearview mirror, and I saw him reach into the driver's side, like through the window. And so I just assumed he was calling it in, checking my license.
Get out of the car now.
Why?
Be quiet.
Then came
You're
back
under arrest.
and asked me to step out of the vehicle.
Get out of the car now.
I didn't do anything.
Just get out.
I didn't do But I didn't do anything.
He opened the car door and I slid in. And when I got inside and I looked around the car, at that point I realized he's not a cop. This is not a police car, and you are in deep trouble.
Colbert said Debardeleben reached under the dashboard and she heard a click as if he had a gun.
He told me that he was not a police officer. Then he said that he wouldn't hurt me as long as I did what he wanted me to do.
He then sexually assaulted her.
I decided that I was going to make it out alive. I was going to survive. So I had to calm myself down. I thought, you need to calm down. You need to keep a level head. And I wanted to remember something about him. So I started staring at him and just burned his face into my memory. And I was determined that I would remember him.
When Debardeleben was finished, he pushed Colbert out of his car.
He led me back to my vehicle, put me back into my car, and told me, don't look back.
Don't tell anybody about this. This never happened.
I just dropped it into driving and left as fast as I could. And went back into Manassas to try to find a police officer.
Detectives in Prince William County obtained a picture of Debardeleben, which they included in a photo lineup.
I looked at the photos and I said, that's him.
That's the guy.
Colbert also recognized a picture of the 1971 Chrysler agents had seized in the counterfeit investigation as the vehicle her assailant was driving. After 2.5 years of investigating the crime, Laurie Colbert's attacker had been identified.
Ma'am, I need to see a license.
The assault of Laurie Colbert fit Debardeleben's pattern exactly as it was outlined by FBI profiler Roy Hazelwood.
He puts a lot of planning into it. He has fantasized about it for a number of months, if not years, prior to the actual commission of the crime. He's rehearsed the crime. When he carries out the crime, it's generally low risk. It's generally without witnesses. It's generally at a time and place of his choosing after giving a lot of careful thought to it. And he doesn't leave any evidence. He's not seen by any witnesses.
The Secret Service had finally linked Debardeleben to a crime, but they knew more victims were out there. Debardeleben had not photographed Laurie Colbert. This still did not explain any of the photographs found in the storage locker. The investigators continued to field calls, hoping to find some explanation for the photos. They got a break when they received a call from an FBI agent working in the nearby Washington, D.C. office.
Those are the ones we brought up with us.
He was investigating a kidnapping case that occurred in Northern Virginia that fit Debardeleben's suspected method of operation. The agent came into the Secret Service offices to look over the photographs found in Debardeleben's lockers. He recognized his victim in some of the pictures. With that realization, the FBI joined the investigation.
look at our photo lineup.
FBI agents brought the victim in for an interview. Because it was dark and everything happened so fast, the victim, Amy Jones, was unable to identify Debardeleben from a photo lineup. In the hopes that she could identify her attacker's voice, FBI agents played one of the tapes from Debardeleben's storage locker. Agent Joseph McElhaney attended the interview.
When we played them to the victim, we only played the very initial portion because she just broke down and became hysterical. But she immediately, without hesitation, 2 seconds into the tape, identified her voice and that of Mr. Debardeleben.
That's the tape he made, she told them, when he assaulted her. Her ordeal began on June 3rd, 1979, when she was walking home from her job at a convenience store in a small Maryland town.
Miss?
Shortly after midnight, a car pulled up next to her.
Ma'am, I'm Officer
The driver identified himself as a police detective.
There's been a robbery in the area and the jogger just...
He said he was investigating a burglary at a local shop. He told her a jogger that had just passed her was a suspect. The detective wanted to ask her some questions.
I need to see some ID.
Once she was in the car, he asked her for identification. When Jones produced her driver's license, the man slipped it into his pocket and told her she was under arrest.
Put your hands behind you. Put your hands behind you.
Before she knew what was happening, he had her wrists in handcuffs.
Somebody help me! Somebody help me!
Shut up. Do what I tell you.
The counterfeit cop handcuffed her feet and covered her eyes with duct tape. Jones said she felt a gun being pressed to the back of her head. He threatened to kill her. The kidnapper threw a blanket over Jones.
She was then driven for a period of time, approximately, according to her account, between 2 and 3 hour drive.
Jones remembered hearing a bell, which investigators believe was the toll gate on a bridge from Maryland to Virginia. The kidnapper took her to an isolated house, where he locked her in a closet, shackling her to an eye bolt in the floor. Jones said he would periodically take her out of the closet and assault her. The kidnapper would instruct her on what to say, Jones went on to explain.
I'm here.
Investigators had come across these very same words in the handwritten torture scenarios they'd found in Debardeleben's lockers. He posed her for the camera and photographed her. He made her repeat a script for his tape recorder. After he was finished, she said, he would lock her in the closet for an hour or so, then drag her out and do it again. Early in the morning on June 4th, after over 28 hours, Jones' ordeal came to an end. Her kidnapper drove her back to Maryland and set her free. He warned her if she went to the police, he'd make sure everyone saw the pictures he had taken. She went to the nearest house and asked to use the telephone.
And he asked me for my ID.
Jones called her mother, and then the police. Amy Jones identified herself in the photos found in the storage locker. She also identified the bedroom where it had taken place. Jones said she had been living in terror that he would return.
Appreciate your time.
Prior to his arrest, she worried every day almost that she was going to bump into him roaming free on the streets. She worried that he would do to others what he had done to her.
Look, I know this is...
The FBI knew they had to do everything they could to ensure that Debardeleben stayed in jail.
And, we looked at each other and said, okay, we think we have the man. There was a sense of relief that this fellow was now off the street.
The Secret Service and the FBI finally identified one of the women from the hundreds of photos found in Debardeleben's locker. FBI agent Roy Hazelwood knew that their investigation was only beginning.
James Mitchell Debardeleben didn't commit a crime and stop committing and then start committing and then stop committing. That just doesn't happen. He committed a crime, and then in between other crimes, he would have been planning, thinking, collecting, gathering intelligence on, or preparing for the next crime. They're never dormant.
Her ordeal was so terrifying, agents wondered how many women like Amy Jones were still out there. The Secret Service had linked James Mitchell Debardeleben to an abduction and rape near Washington, D.C. The strongest evidence they had were photographs and tape recordings he had made during the sexual assault. It is not unusual for criminals to record their crimes, according to FBI Special Agent Roy Hazelwood.
Number one, it serves as a trophy. A trophy meaning victory, conquest. Number two, it serves as validation of an accomplishment. I did it. I really did it. Here it is. And number three, it allows them to critique their behavior during that crime and the behavior of their victims so as to make corrections to anything they want to act out in the future that's similar.
Investigators now had proof Debardeleben's crimes went beyond counterfeiting. Of the two victims they found, only one could visually identify her attacker. They needed more evidence to make a conviction. Then Secret Service agents learned of a rape abduction case in New Jersey. On the evening of November 12th, Karen Alario was alone at the store where she worked. A man entered and asked her if the manager was in.
Oh, no, he's not.
Alario said no, but offered to write down the manager's number.
This is a robbery.
When she turned around, she was looking down both barrels of a sawed-off shotgun.
Get away from me. Just get over here. Turn around. Stand right there. I want to hear it. Move.
He emptied the cash register but wanted more. He wanted her to come with him. He told Alario he didn't want to hurt her, but if she tried to do something stupid, he would shoot her.
Move.
Ordering his victim to avert her eyes, he forced her into his car. He drove for about 15 minutes. Detective Donald Kramer investigated the case.
She has no idea what directions they went in, but it was a relatively short drive. She couldn't see anything. Her eyes were taped. She was under a blanket.
Okay.
Alario told Kramer her kidnapper led her into a house. Once inside, he cut off her blouse and tied her up. As he molested her, he took photographs. As he had with Amy Jones, the next morning he let her go. He offered her some money for a phone call and then left her on a rural road. She flagged a passing motorist and contacted the police.
I wonder if you could
Detective Kramer asked the Secret Service for some photos of Debardeleben and the tapes they had confiscated.
Take your time
Kramer took the photos to Karen Alario.
recognizing if you see him.
She picked Debardeleben out of a photo lineup. 3 years after her abduction, she was still terrified.
We found a tape. We wanted to see if you could.
Alario listened as Detective Kramer played a tape on which Debardeleben laid out his goals.
Secret hidden compartment for stash area, as well as a secret.
Alario said it sounded like him, but she wasn't sure.
I explained to her that I had another tape that was very graphic in nature, and I told her it might be very upsetting.
Kramer played one of the torture tapes.
That's a little better tape.
As Alario listened, she no longer had any doubt.
When she heard the tape, she started to shake a little. She looked at me, she said, "That's him." I asked her if she was sure. She said yes. She was getting very nervous-like, and tears come into her eye and start rolling down her cheek. She said, "That's the guy. That's him."
Although the woman on the tape was not Karen Alario, the victim was forced to repeat similar dialogue.
Shut it off.
In an effort to prove it was Debardeleben's voice on the tapes, investigators made a recording of him reading a transcript. They consulted a voice print specialist who confirmed that the voice on the tapes was in fact Debardeleben's. The Secret Service had now located 3 women whom Debardeleben had forced into acts of sexual degradation. If the photographs he had kept were any indication, there may be hundreds. For the next year and a half, the calls poured in. The Secret Service began to investigate whether Debardeleben might be connected to hundreds of violent crimes. Each call was checked against the database to determine whether Debardeleben may have been involved. To further build their case, the agents sought to prove without a doubt Debardeleben was the man in the photographs with his victims. In all of the torture photos, Debardeleben's face could not be seen. The Secret Service asked for assistance from the Special Photographic Unit of the FBI. They contacted Supervisory Special Agent Peter Smerek, an expert in portrait parley, a technique informally known as freckle analysis.
And a beautiful thing about freckles and moles is that not one of us can control where a freckle or a mole is going to appear on our body or how many of them are going to appear.
Debardeleben's arms were visible in some of the photos, but his face was not. Smerek had used freckle analysis in hundreds of cases. As a method for identification, he felt it was as reliable as fingerprints. Agents asked Smerek if he could make a positive identification using only the parts of Debardeleben's body that were in the photographs.
Unwittingly, in this case, what Mr. Debardeleben did was actually take his own crime scene photographs.
Agents got a court order for Debardeleben to submit to a series of photographs in an office at the jail where he was being held. Agents duplicated the angles and poses in the rape pictures.
So Mr. Debardeleben's body itself became a positive identification for me.
Smerek was able to identify the distinct freckle patterns on Debardeleben's arms, proving without a doubt he was the man in the photos.
Even though his face was not identifiable in the photographs, based upon the freckle patterns on his arm, his hand, his chest, and his biceps, I can say that yes, the man in bed with the victim is in fact James Mitchell Debardeleben.
Prosecutors were now convinced they had a case, but they needed to act quickly. Because Debardeleben had been committing crimes for so long, the statute of limitations on some of the assaults was about to expire. And if that happened, all their evidence would be worthless.
This way, walk. I remember doing
Investigators now had evidence James Mitchell Debardeleben was guilty of more than just counterfeiting. They linked him to the rape abduction of 3 women. He was suspected in hundreds of other cases. Now they had to present their case in court. The kidnapping trial of Amy Jones against James Mitchell Debardeleben began on April 29, 1985. The government decided to call the victim as their first witness. To help Amy Jones cope with her painful memories, the court brought in a victims relief specialist.
Miss Jones, would you please look at these photos and tell me if you can identify the woman?
Jones identified herself as the woman in some of Debardeleben's photos.
It's me. Thank you. Welcome.
Debardeleben was sentenced to 180 years in prison. For the assault on Laurie Colbert, he received 2 life sentences. And for the kidnapping of Karen Alario, he received 60 years. For his counterfeiting crimes, he was sentenced to 135 years. Debardeleben was indicted for 2 murders, one in Shreveport, Louisiana, and the other in Barrington, Rhode Island. He was never tried on either of the cases. His involvement has never been proven.
Some of the murders never came to trial. He hasn't answered for those. I believe that the extent to which there may still be victims out there will never be known. I don't think this case is over. I don't think that it has ended.
Agents made one last attempt to talk with Debardeleben about the crimes he committed. He had already been sentenced to a total of 375 years. Detectives were hoping to convince him that he had nothing to lose by confessing.
You know you're right.
FBI Special Agent McElhenney found he had an arrogant demeanor.
He sort of treated both the Secret Service agents and our agents with disdain, contempt, refused to answer any questions, almost refused to even recognize us. It was like we were talking to a refrigerator, an ice-cold refrigerator.
Debardeleben told the investigators nothing.
We may never know the extent of his criminal activities because he's been uncooperative to this day.
James Mitchell Debardeleben was proven to be a counterfeiter, a rapist, and a kidnapper. According to Roy Hazelwood, he was a highly organized criminal who lived to commit crimes.
This is all he thinks about. This is all he reads about. This is all he writes about. This is all he collects things about. This is his life. So he may not have known that in 7 months I'm going to do this particular crime. He thought about it. And if I were going to do it, here's what I'd need. And if I were going to do it, here's the type of victim I was going to. And if I were going to do it, here's where I'd carry the crime out. And then that evolves over time. And eventually it reaches the point where now's the time. And when he decides to act out, he's extremely well prepared to do so.
Debardeleben's sadistic crimes were always targeted against women. Roy Hazelwood believes they came from an intense hatred.
Miss?
He's very threatened by women. Very threatened by women. So they exert a power over him. And again, he wants to be in total control. And he doesn't like anyone having any type of power over him, much less a woman. I'm not certain we'll ever know the answers to the questions as to why he hated women as much as he did.
The Secret Service agents who worked the case realize they may never know the extent of Debardeleben's crimes.
From the Secret Service's perspective, the case is closed. The counterfeit investigation is resolved. He's in jail serving his sentence for that. There are many cases that we identified him in. Those jurisdictions either did prosecute him or made the decision not to prosecute him because he had already received so many sentences, such a long sentence, and because perhaps with problems with the cases, because the cases were old at that point and maybe witnesses were unavailable or dead. So have we solved every case that this individual committed? Absolutely not. I'm convinced that there are many crimes that he committed that we'll never know about.
James Mitchell Debardeleben is now serving 375 years in prison. Experts estimate his victims could number as many as 200. Although the Secret Service has closed their case against Debardeleben, the evidence they recovered is still being used by law enforcement officials from around the country to try and learn the extent of his crimes. In the 1970s, decades before increased airport security, an armed stranger hijacks a 727, holding the passengers and crew for ransom. To catch the skyjacker, the FBI embarks on a cross-country manhunt. The dangerous chase continues as agents struggle to end his flight from justice and capture one of the United States' most notorious hijackers. In this program, some of the names of the participants have been changed to protect their identities. April 7th, 1972. United Airlines Flight 855, en route from Newark to Los Angeles, was taking on more passengers at a stopover in Denver. It was the usual assortment of tourists and business travelers, with one exception. An escaped convict had been apprehended outside of Denver. He was being escorted by a corrections officer to San Quentin Penitentiary. The pilot and the crew were immediately alerted the convict would be on the plane. It was common for convicted criminals to be transported this way. According to standard operating procedure, the convict's handcuffs were removed and he was escorted to his seat.
Row 20.
Once the prisoner was on board, the rest of the passengers began boarding the plane.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good. 16C, do you want me to take your coat? Okay. Hi, how are you?
In the 1970s, airline security was minimal. Travelers did not pass through metal detectors, and carry-on bags were not x-rayed. If something happened in the air, the flight crew would have to handle it themselves.
There's 1.2 cleared now, 1 beam heading 042. Check.
As the plane was making final preparations to push back from the gate, the passenger got up to go to the bathroom.
Excuse me, sir, was there anyone sitting there?
No, that seat was empty.
Just check.
This created a problem for Captain Jerry Hearn.
Is there someone in there?
One of the passengers
Excuse me, are you
went
all
to
right?
the restroom a
commonly called the Blue Room on the airline. And he was inside the Blue Room when we wanted to push back. And we couldn't do that because we knew he was in there.
The captain asked the senior flight attendant to get the man out of the bathroom. When the man came out, flight attendant Diane Surdam thought his appearance seemed unusual.
I've seen so many strange things with passengers on airplanes. I've had much worse situations. I just thought we had a strange passenger on board. We had to keep an eye on him.
Once the passenger was seated, the flight attendants began their pre-flight briefing.
And we're showing the classic passenger. Your flight attendants, and your other main pilots, try to be comfortable as we can.
The escaped criminal tried to alert his guard, but he didn't want to hear anything about a strange-looking passenger. With everyone seated, the plane took off.
3272 miles.
As was common in the early 70s, the man in seat 20D purchased his one-way ticket in cash. At that time, credit card use was not widespread, and passengers were not required to present any form of photo ID. He had merely given his name as Johnson, first initial J. The man seated in the same row looked over and saw a grenade. He went to the front of the plane to alert the flight attendants. No one else seemed to notice.
There's a man in my row, seat 20, that has a gun.
A what?
A grenade.
The flight attendant told the man to sit down in first class and not tell anyone what he had seen. She informed the captain what the man had told her.
One of the passengers ran into first class and told me that there's a man in row 20 that has a hand.
No sooner had the flight attendant informed the captain than she was greeted by another passenger from the rear of the plane.
The guy in the back gave it to me. He said to give it to a stewardess.
Which guy?
And he said, we have a person in the back of the cabin that wants me to give this to the stewardess in charge of the flight. And he wants you to take this to the cockpit. And I knew it was serious.
I didn't even make it back to see that this
Typed on the outside was a simple message, an ominous threat. It read, "Grenade pin pulled, pistol loaded." Second Officer Kent Owen remembers something odd about the letter.
You know, open up the envelope and unfold the paper, and here was this this pin that was obviously out of some kind of grenade. Who knows what kind, but it's enough to get your attention.
The hijacker was holding the hand grenade in his lap with his hand keeping it from exploding. Without metal detectors in airports, the hijacker simply walked on board with a grenade and a loaded pistol.
You can imagine what would happen if a hand grenade went off inside a pressurized airplane. The possibilities are endless. I mean, you could think about a lot of things could happen. I didn't want to take that chance.
The note was very detailed. The hijacker demanded the plane be diverted to San Francisco. He gave specific instruction on which runway to use and demanded no vehicles be parked within 100 yards of the plane. He wanted $500,000 in cash, 6 hours worth of fuel, and 4 parachutes, all to be delivered to the airport upon their arrival. The note ended with a threat, stating, "We have a grenade, we have pistols, we have C4 plastic explosives. It's a long fall without a parachute."
I think there was a reference to we. And so that led us all to believe that there was certainly the possibility there's more than one person on that airplane that was involved in this.
The crew had no idea how many hijackers were on the plane. It was impossible for them to assess the level of danger.
We've got to take care of this package. What do you think? Well, I think we need to contact
Captain Hearn contacted air traffic control. He informed them he was being hijacked. He said a man in seat 20D threatened them with a hand grenade. 727 was about 15 miles north of Aspen, traveling west at an altitude of 30,000 feet. Captain Hearn requested new coordinates. As soon as they got the new coordinates, the jet changed course. FAA officials alerted the FBI in San Francisco.
Sam, we gotta make sure we're tracking them right now. We gotta make sure that we have this done right now.
Federal agents and law enforcement officials rushed to the San Francisco airport. The runways were cleared and all air traffic was diverted to other airports. The FBI set up a command center in a remote hangar so they wouldn't cause panic at the airport. Their main priority was safety, according to Special Agent Russell Kellum.
In the skyjacking, the biggest concern, the people, the SAC and his office staff, the biggest concern you have is, without a doubt, the safety of the people on the plane.
While FBI agents in San Francisco focused their attention on the plane, their colleagues in Colorado tried to learn everything they could about Mr. Johnson in seat 20D. They interviewed employees at Denver's Stapleton International Airport, the last stop before the plane was hijacked. They gained only a basic description of the man who purchased the ticket for seat 20D. He was a white male, aged 25 to 30. About 5 foot 10 inches and 160 pounds. They ran his name and learned it was an alias. While the authorities on the ground began formulating a plan, inside the 727, the flight attendants and captain worked to keep their passengers safe. Following the hijacker's instructions, Diane Surdam returned the typewritten note and envelope. The captain asked her to try and determine whether the hand grenade was real or not. To Surdam, it appeared the hijacker was not bluffing. Under strict orders from the hijacker not to alert the passengers to the hijacker, the captain had to find a way to explain what was happening.
We made an announcement, a PA announcement, that we had received word that they were expecting fog in Los Angeles for our arrival, and that they had requested that we divert to San Francisco. The whole thing was transpiring so quietly. The hijacker was in the rear, very rear of the aircraft. There were some people back there who had seen, for instance, the hand grenade and the gun, and they knew something was happening, but the majority of the people didn't know anything. So we just decided not to say anything about it.
The people who had seen the grenade were seated in first class. Surdam wondered how long she could keep the truth from the other passengers.
My primary concern was to keep the passengers uninformed at that point about the hijacking, and to keep everybody calm and get the service done and keep people relaxed.
Ladies and gentlemen, all the passenger seatbelt sign has been switched off at this time. We would like to suggest the use of your seatbelts while turning off again. A little later on in the flight, we'll be opening our gate for safety. Flight attendants will probably provide as pleasant and comfortable as we can. Please don't listen to the
As the plane neared San Francisco, authorities were ready for its arrival. The agent's tactical plan called for keeping the plane on the ground as long as possible. While it was on the runway, they could better control the situation. Sharpshooters took positions on air terminal rooftops. While the teams were mobilizing, the FBI secured the items the hijacker requested. The money from a bank in San Francisco, all $500,000, was collected, stacked and counted, then recounted. Serial numbers were recorded. The bills were in the exact denominations asked for by the hijacker. The money was repacked into briefcases according to the hijacker's instructions. The $500,000 filled 2 briefcases and weighed 40 pounds.
Mike, I already noticed.
The hijacker's demands included 4 packed parachutes. The FBI wasn't certain whether he would force the crew to jump and he would fly the plane, or whether he would jump from the plane and leave the crew on board. In case of either eventuality, the FBI concealed tracking devices in the fabric. They would activate when the chute deployed.
They prepared those chutes by putting in radios as well, with beepers, just radio beepers. Now, they don't last forever. They're very small, small batteries.
The batteries had a life of 12 hours. If the hijacker jumped from the plane, investigators hoped that would give them enough time to find him. While the agents were preparing to meet the hijacker's demands, they were also developing a plan to get the passengers and crew off the plane safely. If things went badly, they might have to take out the hijackers. They knew that was risky.
It can always go bad, and when it goes bad, it goes so quickly that it's just, it's instantaneous. People react. There's just too many things that can go wrong.
As the plane went into its landing pattern outside of San Francisco, the hijacker had another instruction for the flight attendants. He wanted them to clear the passengers in the last few rows.
Get back there.
All except one, the convict. The stewardess told the passengers she needed to redistribute some of the weight in the plane and asked people to move forward. The flight attendants were then ordered to sit in the back row. The hijacker was now in complete control of the airplane. On April 7, 1972, the United Airlines 727, bound for Los Angeles, was hijacked over the Rocky Mountains and diverted to San Francisco. The hijacker was armed with a hand grenade and a pistol. He was demanding 4 parachutes and $500,000. The hijacker's unusual demand seemed strangely familiar to First Officer Kent Owen.
Yeah, when we heard he was asking for parachutes, the first thing that jumps into your mind is D.B. Cooper on Northwest Airlines.
For over 4 months, police had been searching for D.B. Cooper. He hijacked a plane and parachuted out the back with $200,000 strapped to his chest, and then disappeared. He seemed to have vanished. Some law enforcement officials believed he died in the jump. Others thought he got away. None of the money had turned up. People all over the Pacific Northwest joined the search. They were all looking for the hijacker or the money. His daring escape was the only unsolved hijacking case in U.S. history. The FBI instituted a nationwide manhunt for the hijacker. Neither federal agents nor the United Airlines crew knew enough to determine if this was indeed the famed D.B. Cooper at work, or a masterful copycat. They would simply have to wait it out. United Flight 855 landed shortly before 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. The plane was finally on the ground. The FBI sharpshooters kept the plane in their sights. Once they were on the ground, the one known hijacker had more pre-typed instructions for the crew. He planned out every aspect of their time on the ground. The hijacker demanded all passenger luggage be removed from the cargo hold except his, which he wanted retrieved. No one, however, could leave the plane. He wanted the passengers moved to the front of the plane and the curtains to first class drawn closed. Captain Gerald Hearn knew he could no longer keep his passengers in the dark. He informed them of the situation, recalls flight attendant Diane Surdam.
I remember the captain being very polite and very calming and saying there was a gentleman on board, something to the effect that there's a gentleman on board who wants some of our money and that we're going to accommodate him and we're going to take care of this.
The passengers began to panic. Surdam tried to calm them to make certain no one did anything to provoke their captor. Again, as requested, Surdam returned the carefully typed instructions to the hijacker. On the ground, the FBI kept a close eye on the plane and stayed in constant contact with the pilot. With so many innocent lives at stake, the FBI had to proceed very carefully. Agents set up a perimeter around the airport. The media learned of the hijacking. News crews descended on the airport to cover the breaking story. The first thing the hijacker requested was 6 hours worth of fuel. He even gave them specific instructions on where to park the truck. The FBI told the fuel technicians to take their time. The agents wanted to keep the plane on the ground as long as possible, according to Agent Russell Callan.
They were meeting the demands, and of course they had a fueling truck there. They're looking for an opportunity to get aboard to arrest, subdue that skyjacker. But really, it's difficult to find one. And you don't get an opportunity when you've got all those passengers aboard because it's risky.
The refueling was taking longer than the hijacker expected, and by 7 p.m., he was growing impatient. Pilot Gerald Hearn.
As it went on and he was asking for information from us as to what was happening, and we were unable to give him a definitive answer because we didn't have an answer. The hijacker became very agitated. almost to the point that he became hysterical at one time.
His demands weren't being met quickly enough, and he knew the FBI was trying to stall him. He gave another note to Serta.
Give him another note.
This time he gave specific instructions on where to drop the money, the parachutes, and his luggage.
Once the money and parachutes arrive,
The co-pilot radioed to the FBI the latest information and told them the hijacker was becoming angry. The FBI knew someone would have to go outside to retrieve the items. They hoped to catch sight of at least one of the hijackers once the ransom was dropped off. Maybe they could get a clear shot. If they did, their orders were to shoot to kill. They waited for a slip-up or mistake, any opportunity to rush the plane. The hijacker chose the convict and another passenger to go outside and retrieve the items. Neither of the men fit the description of the one known hijacker. Without a confirmed target, the sharpshooters couldn't fire. As the men brought the items in, the hijacker was careful to ensure everything he asked for had been done. It was all there.
As I thought about his demands, and I realized that he had asked for 4 parachutes, it became apparent to me that, hey, this hijacking is not over. This is halftime. We're going to have to take off and get up where he can jump out. Let's just hope that some of us are not in the other parachutes as hostages or something like that.
By 7:30, the money was on board. The hijacker wrote a quick message for the cockpit. The note said simply, "Everybody off now, except stewardesses. They stay put. Get off the ground." The pilot informed the FBI of the contents of the note.
Okay, copy that. We'll call you straight in.
Hostages are being released. Go to your staging areas. Shooters.
I'd like to let you know that all passengers connected.
He then told the passengers they were free to leave.
Calmly but quickly.
As the hostages left the plane, the FBI held their positions.
Shooters, you got a shot?
Negative, no shot.
They weren't certain whether the hijacker or hijackers might have tried to hide themselves among the departing passengers. Sharpshooters remained on alert. They kept a close watch on the convict. The agents had no way of knowing what his role was in the hijacking. They scrutinized all of the passengers, but with only a vague description of the one known culprit, getting a shot off would not be easy. As the passengers exited the plane, flight attendant Diane Serta made a bold move.
In the activity of deplaning these people as quickly as possible and not really knowing what was in store for us, I suddenly realized that I had this note crumpled up in my hand, and I was very near the compartment where I stored my purse. And I remember very quickly not really giving it much thought, but for some reason thinking, stick this in your purse, and that's exactly what I did.
She hoped he'd forgotten about the note.
Okay. All right, come on, let's go. With me. That way. Second row, sit down.
The hijacker had other things on his mind. With night approaching, he told the flight attendants to sit in first class. He then turned out the cabin lights.
I didn't know what was going on back there because it was dark. We could not see him and did not know what his plans were and what he was doing. We could not surmise what was happening and plan any kind of an action.
Inside the airport, the passengers were met by the media.
No, I was people were not frightened at all during the entire.
Agents also began the difficult job of trying to debrief them.
What they're trying to do is get that basic description. How many skyjackers? What did he look like? How was he dressed? What did he do? What did you see? When you interview two or more people, you always have differences. Perceptions are different.
We've got the convict. We're going to do a pre-interview.
Federal agents questioned the convict about what he had seen on the plane. They determined he had no involvement in the hijacking, but was used by the hijacker. The convict was the only person to have seen the hijacker without his disguise.
And then he sees this fellow go into the lavatory, one of the rear lavatories, and when he sees him come out, he's changed his clothing, his appearance. He's wearing a wig. He's wearing heavy makeup to make his skin darker. You know, mustache, the whole works. Something's up. He even tried to tell his correctional officer escort, but I think the escort pretty much just, sit down, be quiet, and shut up. That type of reaction.
The convict gave the authorities a description. At 7:40 p.m., United Airlines Flight 855 taxied down the runway. After 3 hours in San Francisco, it was now airborne again. As it crossed the night sky, the FBI agents had no idea where it was headed. Authorities had hoped for a break, some sort of slip-up, but this hijacker was very smooth. Experienced, some law enforcement officials surmised, or else very, very lucky. Lucky, like D.B. Cooper. A man authorities suspected was the infamous D.B. Cooper had hijacked a 727 and forced it to land in San Francisco. The FBI met his demands, delivering 4 parachutes, 6 hours of fuel, and $500,000. The hijacker allowed the passengers to deplane, then instructed the crew and the pilot to take off again. The plane headed east. Chase planes operated by the U.S. Coast Guard were immediately deployed. They carried federal agents, and their instructions were to tail the stolen jetliner from a distance. One of those agents, Leonard Barnes, works undercover for the Bureau. His face is obscured, and his name has been changed to protect his identity and preserve other ongoing investigations.
In previous hijackings, most notably the D.B. Cooper hijacking, we had not known where the hijacker parachuted out of the plane, and you end up with a huge search area that becomes a mission impossible to try to find the hijacker.
If the hijacker jumped or forced the plane down in a remote airfield, Barnes and his team had to know exactly where to look. Chase planes had to maintain visual contact with the hijacked 727.
I had grave reservations about a turboprop aircraft being able to keep up with a 727 jet.
The agents also had another problem. They had to follow the plane without being seen. The hijacker warned if he spotted a chase plane, he would parachute out and then blow up the jetliner. The FBI had to take the risk. If this was the infamous D.B. Cooper, they could not let him escape a second time. The hijacker's flight plans instructed the pilot to follow a zigzagging path over Nevada and Utah. The FBI had no idea what the plane's final destination was. With 6 hours of fuel, the plane could fly all the way across the country or into Canada or Mexico. Agents across the western and mountain states were notified. FBI Special Agent Russell Callum.
He tried to throw us off, if you will, by zigzagging to some extent. So, you think he's going to Denver 1 minute, he's going to Reno, you don't know where he's going.
Somewhere in this arc. It's a pretty big area. And you know, the possibility.
As the jetliner cut its way through the night sky, the chase plane struggled to keep the plane in constant visual contact. They remained in communication with a united pilot. Captain Hearn urged the chasers to be careful to hang back, out of visual range. The planes would be easy to spot. The visibility was good, the air crystal clear. The hijacker obviously understood flying. He continued to change the flight plan using professional notations. All his directions were written on FAA flight plan forms. He even instructed the pilot on his altitude and speed. When the plane reached 12,000 feet, a red light on the instrument panel flashed. The rear cabin door was open. At that altitude, the plane was depressurized. The flight attendants grabbed oxygen. The air was cold. The aft door released a flight of stairs that would normally reach the target. Judging by the noise, the pilot suspected it was now flapping in the wind.
He selected the 727 because that the rear stairs came down from the belly of the aircraft and presented a very excellent launching pad for him to bail out from. There were no other aircraft at that time, commercial, in which he could do that.
The captain alerted the chase plane that the door had been opened. He feared the hijacker was preparing to make the jump. The hijacker gave another set of instructions to the crew. More zigzagging flight plans. Air traffic control noted the jetliner's new coordinates. The plane was headed for Utah. Across the region, state troopers and canine squads were mobilized. If the hijacker jumped over Utah, they were determined to capture him. Special Agent Russ Callum was in charge.
He's got to get off that plane with the money. So I think we would have been fairly certain in our own minds at the time, yeah, he's going to jump. Now, is he going to push stewardesses out? Is he going to use those extra parachutes? Has he brought any parachutes aboard? The biggest concern you have is, without a doubt, the safety of the people on the plane.
There was nothing anyone could do but wait for the hijacker to make his next move. They wouldn't have to wait. The plane was near the Utah border. The tracking planes reported they picked up a signal from a radio transmitter attached to one of the parachutes. Someone had jumped from the 727, or someone had been pushed. For nearly 6 hours, the FBI tracked a man who hijacked a plane requesting 4 parachutes and $500,000. As the plane zigzagged across the night sky, FBI agent Russ Callum at the Utah Command Center in Salt Lake City got the news. The signal from one of the FBI's bug parachutes was picked up.
Where do you think?
The chase planes were tracking it over the desert on the western edge of the state, about 2 to 3 hours away. The chase plane could not see if anyone jumped out. They didn't know if it was the escaping hijacker, but a flight attendant forced to jump first as a decoy.
I think he just threw a chute out.
Before Callum sent his agents halfway across the state, only to find an empty parachute had been tossed from the plane. He waited for confirmation from the pilot.
No, not this time. Let's wait.
Now, he doesn't know whether he's jumped or not. And the first reports in this case, we were told that possibly the skyjacker had jumped. Now, if we had taken that initial report, our agents in Salt Lake, here we'd had 150, 80 miles, whatever it is, over to near Wilson, out in the desert in Nevada. And we got over there and we got halfway or all the way or whatever, we'd have been pretty much out of action. So we really needed confirmation.
The agents contacted the plane to see if everyone was still on board. Inside, all the crew was accounted for. The hijacker was still working in the back of the plane.
Roger.
Yeah, he's still here.
The pilot radioed the chute must have been a decoy meant to confuse police. In the next few moments, 2 more signals appeared. Precious minutes ticked by as each signal was checked out. Again, they were both false alarms. In accordance with the hijacker's wishes, the plane lumbered through the night air at 180 knots. Captain Hearn was flying dangerously slow. He was having difficulty staying aloft. A 50-mile-per-hour tailwind was the only thing keeping the jet airborne at 14,000 feet. The hijacker had one more direction for the pilot. Captain Hearn radioed his new coordinates to air traffic control. The hijacker ordered him to execute a turn to the south near Provo, Utah. That's when they felt a bump.
You've heard of flying by the seat of your pants. You're flying and getting feelings from the aircraft. It's almost like you're one, you and the aircraft are one. So you are aware of the aircraft's movements or their feelings or any change.
Captain Hearn radioed the FBI in Salt Lake City in the chase planes and told them he thought their passenger was gone. Again, the FBI needed visual confirmation. The wait was excruciating. Each minute that passed decreased the chances of catching the hijacker in midair and trailing him to the ground. Flight attendant Diane Surdam walked through the plane to see if the hijacker had jumped.
I remember the cabin being dark, very cold. I was kind of moving myself along with my hands on each seat, kind of pushing myself along to the back of the plane. And then I realized, at that point, I wasn't sure whether he was still there or not. I kind of felt that he would jump out at me.
When Surdam made it to the back of the plane, she found the hijacker was gone. He had jumped somewhere between Provo and a small town called Springville, Utah. Federal, state, and local law enforcement mobilized. The FBI agents in Salt Lake City were on alert. When they got word the hijacker jumped, the men took off in pursuit. If this hijacker was in fact the infamous D.B. Cooper, the FBI knew they had to move fast to ensure he didn't get away a second time. After a man hijacked a 727 and jumped from the back with $500,000, law enforcement agents converged on Provo, Utah. They believe the hijacker landed somewhere on the sprawling prairie and mudflats covering some 35 miles around Utah Lake.
Roadblocks were being set up by the local officials. Of course, once he jumped, they concentrated the roadblocks in and around Provo, Utah.
No one knew where or how safely the hijacker would land. As locals knew all too well, in certain parts of the mudflats, a person could sink up to his neck.
Highly unlikely that they would have very complete or good roadblock systems set up, not knowing where he jumped. It would be after he jumped that they could distribute their people and make an effective roadblock. Roadblocks are tough enough anytime, and especially at night. People can get around. Somebody who knows the back roads, he can get around a roadblock.
After being held hostage for 8 hours, the crew was relieved to be on the ground. They were instructed by the FBI to leave all their belongings on the plane. After the plane was determined safe, agents scoured it from nose to tail, searching for any physical evidence the hijacker may have left behind. They collected anything that could be evidence, including plastic cups and cigarettes. They even collected the airline's in-flight magazine. In the cockpit, the final typed flight plans provided by the hijacker were recovered. But perhaps the most interesting discovery of all came from the purse of flight attendant Diane Surdam. She managed to save one of the notes, a page written in the hijacker's own hand. All the evidence was flown to the FBI's crime lab outside Washington, D.C.
He was passing there back and forth during the whole trip.
At the airport, the crew was debriefed. Only the flight attendants got a good look at the man, and that was only after he'd applied a disguise.
Chris.
In all the notes were
None of them felt positive they could ID him if they saw him again. Across a 65-mile-wide strip, state troopers stopped motorists, and flares descended from the sky. The night was filled with light and activity, yet somehow a man, a parachute, and 40 pounds of cold, hard cash vanished into thin air. In the 1970s, decades before increased airport security, an armed stranger hijacks a 727, holding the passengers and crew for ransom. To catch the skyjacker, the FBI embarks on a cross-country manhunt. The dangerous chase continues as agents struggle to end his flight from justice and capture one of the United States' most notorious hijackers. In this program, some of the names of the participants have been changed to protect their identities. On April 7th, 1972, an armed man forced a passenger jet to make an unscheduled landing in San Francisco. He was holding the passengers and crew hostage in exchange for $500,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and 6 hours of jet fuel. The FBI was forced to watch and wait while the hijacker remained in complete control of the situation. After his demands were met, he released the hostages but kept the crew on board. This hijacking was remarkably similar to an event that occurred 4 months earlier when a man named D.B. Cooper jumped from a jetliner with hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash and vanished. The FBI wanted to ensure this hijacker didn't get away. As darkness fell, he ordered the plane to take off. Suspecting the hijacker would use the parachute to jump from the plane, the FBI followed in close pursuit. Somewhere over Utah, the pilot felt a strange bump. The hijacker must have parachuted out, but he needed visual confirmation. Flight attendant Diane Surdam walked to the back of the plane to determine whether he was still on board. The hijacker was gone. He had jumped somewhere between Provo and a small town called Springville, Utah. Law enforcement agents converged on Provo, setting up roadblocks all over the area. They believe the hijacker landed somewhere on the sprawling prairie and mud flats covering some 35 miles around Utah Lake. The search continued all night, but they found no trace of him. The next morning, law enforcement officials in Utah continued the search. Daring hijacking in U.S. history landed upon them, literally from out of the blue. It had been nearly 10 hours since the hijacker jumped, and police continued to canvass the area. The search area stretched nearly 40 square miles along the rural, rambling hillsides of Provo, Utah, and around the mudflats near Utah Lake. Investigators suspected they were searching for the infamous D.B. Cooper. 4 months earlier, he hijacked a plane over Washington state demanding $200,000. Like this most recent hijacking, he also parachuted from the plane. No sign of D.B. Cooper or his money was ever found. If D.B. Cooper had struck again, the investigators in Utah were determined not to let him slip through their fingers a second time. But the territory was wide, and after hours of searching, officials found nothing. No suspect, no parachute, no money. The case was becoming remarkably similar to D.B. Cooper, according to Agent Russell Cowan.
The modus operandi generally did tie pretty well together in my mind. There's detail after detail as far as the number of chutes, the procedures, where the fuel truck should go, where he sat in the seat.
As local police intensified their search, the FBI got a tip. A highway patrolman called the Utah FBI and told them he had a friend named Richard McCoy who he thought might be involved.
How many did you find?
He also worked as a dispatcher for the Utah Highway Patrol. He happened to be on duty that Friday night of the jump, so he's hearing broadcasts. He's hearing all the talk and discussion. So he has a few seconds apparently, and he calls for Richard. Richard's not home.
The patrolman told the investigators Richard McCoy talked with him about hijacking a plane and parachuting out the back. The FBI was getting hundreds of false leads, but because of the source of this one, they decided to check it out. McCoy lived nearby, so 2 agents were sent to his home. He lived in a very modest house in a suburb of Provo. When they asked whether they could talk with Richard McCoy, his sister-in-law, who lived with the family, said he was at National Guard duty. The agents inquired if they could speak to McCoy's wife. They were told she could not come to the door.
That made me realize, you know, there could be really something to this.
Agents looked into McCoy's background. They obtained a copy of his Army service records. His past military service was impressive. He had done 2 tours in Vietnam, first as a demolition expert and Green Beret. Later, he re-enlisted, training as a helicopter pilot. He'd received several medals, including the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Purple Heart. The agents learned he was currently piloting a helicopter in the search for the hijacker. The military file contained samples of his fingerprints and handwriting, which they sent to the crime lab. Richard McCoy was pulled out of National Guard duty and questioned by the FBI. He was very cooperative with the agents.
I'd like you to do something for me.
He agreed to provide a handwriting sample.
And card, I'd like you to write something for me.
They asked him to write down the words found on the note Diane Surdam hid in her purse.
Everybody off now except stewardesses. Get off the ground.
told the agents he had been out to dinner with his wife on the night of the hijacking. The agents took his photo, but they didn't have enough to make an arrest. McCoy was free to go. McCoy did not seem to be the kind of criminal they were looking for. He was a Mormon, a father of two, studying law enforcement at Brigham Young University. Agents learned McCoy practiced jumping with a local skydiving school. An instructor at the school told agents McCoy was at best an average parachutist. He had never known him to dive at night. When asked if he'd ever heard McCoy talk about hijacking a plane, the instructor said since the D.B. Cooper case, most of the skydivers talked about it. Investigators took McCoy's photo to San Quentin. They showed it to the convict, and he picked Richard Floyd McCoy out of a photo lineup without hesitation.
That's the guy. Number 6.
Then the FBI got a break.
Things start falling in line when the document section of the FBI calls him and says that's his writing, that skyjack note. And then the ident division calls and says, and we've identified 2 latent fingerprints on the mainliner magazine that was taken from that seat. Everything started falling in place.
Investigators now had enough for a search warrant and an arrest warrant. Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. may have known how to escape in midair, but now on the ground, he was cornered. At dawn on April 9th, 1972, Utah FBI agents gathered outside the home of Richard Floyd McCoy. He was the only suspect in a daring hijacking of a United Airlines 727. McCoy had been up early that morning. He was to report for National Guard duty. Federal law enforcement, however, had other plans.
Freeze FBI, you're under arrest! Get out, get out, get out on the ground!
After matching his fingerprints and handwriting to items found on the hijacked plane, Richard McCoy was arrested in his home. Lead agent Russell Callum felt McCoy's motivation was obvious.
You understand? Anything you say can and will be
Money, I know, was tight. He had the capability, the expertise. I think he got obsessed with the idea. And I say that based on some of the people that knew him socially, what they said, what they heard him say. His back was kind of up against the wall.
Everybody back.
The media, who had been following the search, got word of the arrest and was on hand as McCoy was taken away. Friends and neighbors in the quiet town of Provo were stunned by the news. Armed with a warrant, FBI agents searched the house. In a closet, they recovered a bag with a helmet, military flight suit, and skydiving equipment. They also found a file of newspaper clippings on the infamous D.B. Cooper hijacking case. The evidence was piling up. A .45 caliber pistol was found sitting alongside a hand grenade. The grenade, they discovered, was a dud. Then, for investigators, came the most stunning sight of all. $499,970. A mere $30 shy of the whole $500,000. Not surprisingly, the serial numbers on the bills matched those paid by United Airlines as ransom. Richard Floyd McCoy was charged with air piracy and held without bond in the Salt Lake County Jail. The FBI's case seemed airtight. They were interested in trying to prove the connection between McCoy and Cooper. The FBI began to dig deep into the D.B. Cooper case. They found striking similarities. Both Cooper and McCoy used false names and disguises. They both gave instructions to the pilot on FAA forms. The way the passengers were moved to the front of the plane and finally released were identical in both cases. As was, of course, their unusual means of escape. Investigators surmised on the night of the jump, McCoy secured the money to his jumpsuit and leapt out of the plane. He probably used the sport chute to steer himself away from the searchers. He must have landed in a field outside the FBI search perimeter. The chute he jumped with, he had brought with him, and it did not have a homing device. But the most intriguing evidence linking McCoy with Cooper was something Cooper left on the plane. A clip-on tie and tie clasp, both of which were identified by relatives as belonging to Richard McCoy. The evidence, however, was purely circumstantial. There were no fingerprints that placed McCoy on the scene of the first hijacking. No proof of his whereabouts on the day of the crime. And no sign of the money. On June 26, 1972, Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. went on trial for only one count of air piracy. The state presented its handwriting and fingerprint evidence, the eyewitness who identified the suspect in a lineup, and the weapons and ransom money found in the defendant's home. The jury reached a verdict in 90 minutes. Guilty. Before he was sentenced, however, the defendant had to meet with federal probation officer Bernie Rhodes. Rhodes was to give the judge a sentencing recommendation, but he had an ulterior motive.
The questions we were interested in were not only what Richard McCoy had done today, but what he had done 5 months earlier when D.B. Cooper, a man matching his description, using the name Dan Cooper, purchased a one-way ticket from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. We believe that Richard McCoy was the individual that did that.
A couple months before it did.
It was the last chance anyone from Utah law enforcement would have to question the defendant about D.B. Cooper.
And I was he gets hurt.
But McCoy stood firm.
Damage to any property.
He told Rhodes he was home with his wife the night D.B. Cooper jumped out of a plane over Washington State.
And I had
when questioned further as to whether he was Cooper, McCoy said nothing. Richard McCoy received 45 years to be served in a federal penitentiary. The hijacker was sent to the maximum security facility in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Behind the barbed wire fences, investigators were convinced they had heard the last of Richard McCoy and D.B. Cooper. FBI agent Russell Callum remembers Richard McCoy didn't share their sentiments.
And I remember it very well. He said, "I'll tell you right now, I'll escape." Told me to my face, "I'll escape." He says, "You guys aren't gonna hold me. You're not gonna hold me."
Agent Callum had heard it all before. McCoy was a former Green Beret, and he had jumped out the back of a jetliner. Richard Floyd McCoy was not a man to make idle threats. In 1972, Richard McCoy was sent to Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, a maximum security facility in Pennsylvania. He was sentenced to serve 45 years for air piracy after he hijacked a plane over Colorado and demanded $500,000 and 4 parachutes. He jumped from the plane at an altitude of 14,000 feet with the money strapped to his chest. He was captured 2 days later by the FBI at his home outside Provo, Utah. At Lewisburg, McCoy was considered an escape risk. When he was sentenced, McCoy told reporters he would rather go before a firing squad or to the gas chamber than spend the rest of his life behind bars. But Richard McCoy had no choice. When he arrived, the guards were told to keep a close watch on him, according to retired prison guard Randy Noon.
McCoy was on the hot list because he was doing 45 years for air piracy, and he had made comments that he could never do 45 years, and his first opportunity he was going to leave the scene.
Having completed more years of higher education than the typical inmate, McCoy was assigned a job in the prison dental lab. Although the guards monitored him closely, it was not close enough. McCoy wasted no time formulating a plan to make his escape. He started making a gun out of dental plaster. To help him escape, McCoy struck up a friendship with Marvin Wells, a career criminal serving 55 years for a series of bank robberies and a prison break. The two made for an unlikely pair, a Mormon who'd studied law enforcement and a stick-up man. As far as the guards knew, Richard McCoy was a model prisoner.
McCoy, he was a good inmate. He was a Mormon. He was a Sunday school teacher. McCoy was sort of easygoing but calculated.
In 1973, after 10 months behind bars, the appellate court upheld his conviction, and the Supreme Court denied a motion to hear the case. McCoy thought the appeals might be his ticket to freedom. Now, he wasn't going anywhere. He'd even been excommunicated from the Mormon Church. It was time to make his break. After years of watching, McCoy noticed every Saturday a garbage truck left the prison at the same time. It took the inside Sallyport gate exactly 16 seconds to close after the truck entered. Armed with their finished .45 caliber pistol made of plaster, the two men waited for the right moment. McCoy and Wells needed help, and so they were joined by two other convicted robbers. On August 10, 1974, right on schedule, the truck entered the Sallyport. Everything was going according to plan. Using gloves they'd stolen from work detail, the men vaulted the fence. As McCoy anticipated, there was only one guard by the truck. He was unarmed. The men revved up the truck and crashed through the outside gate of the cell. The officer in the tower fired at the truck, but the bullets bounced off the heavy steel.
Now, in any escape, you've got to have a good plan, but you got to have a lot of luck. And these guys had a lot of luck. When they ran through the rear gate, the gate flipped up and landed on top of the garbage truck.
Luck held when the gate slid off the truck and wedged into the exit of the prison. When the officers arrived, they found the road blocked. Go out the other exit, buying the convicts precious time. Police were dispatched from all over the state. Because the gate blocked the exit, the convicts had a small head start on their pursuers. Outside the prison, the fugitives pulled off when they saw a couple getting out of their car. While McCoy and his men went to talk with the couple, one of the convicts pulled the truck to the back of the house. Inside, the men told the couple they only needed some civilian clothes and a less noticeable getaway car. They took the clothes and their car keys and left the couple tied up in their kitchen. As they jumped in the car, the police were already scrambling to pick up their trail. The FBI was immediately notified. Agent Delmar Mayfield joined the search.
This was the first escape from inside since 1953. And anytime somebody's desperate enough to break out of an institution like they did, then they're desperate enough to be very dangerous.
Richard McCoy made good on his promise. He was on the run once again. As night fell, it appeared law enforcement had lost track of McCoy and the convicts. Fugitives had been on the run for several hours and had tied up and stolen the car of a married couple. By the time the couple freed themselves and called police, the convicts were long gone. Police widened their search perimeter around the prison. Investigators believe the men were armed and dangerous. They found no clues to the direction in which they were traveling. By the next morning, state police, sheriff's deputies, and FBI agents, aided by search dogs and helicopters, combed the wooded mountains in a 20-mile radius around the prison.
We found out what direction they were headed in, which was west, when he assumed they were headed for the mountains. We knew the area pretty well. And there was a lot of cabins in that area. People were spending the weekend up there. My partner and I decided we would take that route and go up there and start knocking on doors and warning the people that was in the area that there was an escape from the institution.
While investigators searched west, the convicts moved south. The gang needed cash to stay on the land. So the escaped convicts decided to do what they knew best. Armed robbery.
Everybody down!
3 days after the jailbreak in Pollocksville, North Carolina, a small town near where Richard McCoy had grown up, 3 masked gunmen entered a bank, tied up the staff, and ran away with over $16,000. The 4th man was seen driving the getaway car. Special Agent Bob Fanning and other members of the FBI were called in to work the case. They were aware of the jailbreak in Pennsylvania.
We knew that McCoy had a number of relatives living in and around Cove City. Logical assumption would be that they're going in that direction and would possibly be in contact with some of his relatives down there.
Almost immediately, they suspected Richard McCoy and his gang.
They may have been the ones involved in this because of the fact that McCoy and the 3 guys that he had escaped with were all convicted bank robbers.
Just come over here, I'll talk to you then, okay?
The agents could not confirm their suspicions. None of the tellers saw the robbers clearly enough to make an identification. A massive manhunt was organized. But the terrain, a rural, swampy area, made for slow going.
A couple of other agents spent several hours driving around the back roads in that area looking to see if we would spot anything unusual. We were basically just kind of scouting the area and looking for this car that had been stolen up in Pennsylvania.
The men made their way to a deserted logging road and began trying to hide their car. Then they heard the helicopter. The pilot spotted 4 men near the Great Dover Swamp. The men scattered in all directions into the surrounding brush. The pilot called for backup. weapons. The helicopter followed two of the men and led police to them. Two of the robbers were captured, and $5,000 from the bank recovered. Agents confirmed the men were the convicts they'd been searching for since they broke out of prison in Pennsylvania. But the ringleaders, Richard McCoy and Marvin Wells, had vanished. It appeared as if they were swallowed up by the thick, dank foliage of the North Carolina swamps. The FBI and local law enforcement concentrated their manhunt in the area, but again, they lost Marvin Wells and Richard McCoy. Four convicts used a garbage truck to break through a prison gate in rural Pennsylvania and escape from the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. The ringleader of the gang was hijacker Richard McCoy. While police were tracking the fugitives, they were busy robbing banks. In rural North Carolina, authorities caught up with them. Two of the men were captured, but the ringleaders, Marvin Wells and Richard McCoy, still eluded. For Richard McCoy, these North Carolina woods were home. McCoy spent many hours of his youth in the snake-infested swamps of Craven County, exploring its labyrinth of hidden inlets and waterways. The FBI put their top investigators on the case, but it was hopeless. 1 month passed, then another. Officials finally had to admit McCoy and Wells had slipped away out of the region. They had, in fact, headed west. They needed money to stay on the run and resume doing what Wells and McCoy were best known for: taking other people's money. Months after their escape, two armed men matching McCoy and Wells' description walked into a bank in Maryville, Tennessee. In a matter of minutes, they had gotten away with more than $76,000. Not bad for a professional bank robber and a one-time Sunday school teacher. When the Tennessee FBI responded to the bank, they found no fingerprints. Because the robbers' faces were covered, no one could describe the men. According to an FBI report, one of the robbers was described as quiet, soft-spoken, and talked like he had some education. The FBI all over the Southeast was searching for the bank robbing pair. They kept running into the same dead ends. After the men robbed a bank, they seemed to vanish. In Virginia, the Norfolk office of the FBI got a break when they received an anonymous tip. McCoy and Wells were hiding out in a house nearby. Special Agent Nicholas O'Hara was assigned to the case.
My supervisor called me in the office because I had the McCoy case. He called me in the office and he said, I've got an address I want you to check out. There might be some relationship.
O'Hara coordinated the FBI search for the fugitives. They started by trying to determine if the tip was valid.
We started knocking on doors of neighbors, showed them pictures of these two guys, and they told us that there were two men, right age group, white males, and they were really good neighbors. We didn't have a positive identification as to if those people were the people we were looking for, but it was good enough for us.
The agents set up surveillance. They needed a positive ID. If this was their hideout, they were determined not to let the men slip away again.
So what we did, we went across the street and spent the entire night watching the house.
For 2 days, O'Hara and his men staked out the suspected McCoy Wells hideout. There was no sign of the men. They set up surveillance around the neighborhood. On November 8th, agents noticed for the second night in a row, the same light turned on in the house at the same time. They had seen no activity inside and assumed the light was on a timer. The men decided this was their chance to go in and search the hideout. They were prepared in case the fugitives were inside. But the house was empty.
We found fully loaded guns by every window, and there was a clipping that we found of a Maryville, Tennessee bank robbery where two masked individuals had robbed it of about $76,000. So we felt pretty comfortable that this was the right group.
The FBI made the decision to lay in wait. As they waited, one of the surveillance teams spotted Wells and McCoy. Wells was driving the car. He stopped about a block away from the house. It was a cold, dank Saturday night. Unbeknownst to Richard McCoy, a few blocks away, 3 FBI agents were waiting for him, poised with shotguns in their hands. Richard McCoy would shortly be in their sights. The agents across the street watched as McCoy fumbled for his keys. It had been 90 days since he broke out of Lewisburg Penitentiary. The FBI was less than 10 feet from their suspect. Richard McCoy transformed from a law-abiding family man into a ruthless criminal. He had hijacked a plane, robbed several banks, and escaped from a federal prison. By November 1974, it had been 3 months since he and Marvin Wells drove through the front gate of Lewisburg Penitentiary. The FBI was still hunting him. Agents waited as McCoy slid the key into the front door of his hideout. When McCoy heard the FBI, he reached for his gun and fired. Outside the house, Marvin Wells took off. didn't get far. Agent Bill Rafferty pursued.
It was high speed until we got right abreast to him, and then I just put the car into him. My partner sitting next to me had a shotgun, and he put it on him, no doubt about it. And I pulled the car right against his door so he couldn't get out even if he wanted to. Because escape is always on these guys' minds, no matter what.
The agents put Wells in cuffs and escorted him back to the house. Marvin Wells and Richard McCoy had been stopped. Richard McCoy died instantly from a gunshot wound to the chest. It was 90 days since Richard McCoy and Marvin Wells broke out of the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. For McCoy, the 90th day of freedom was his last. The FBI caught their man, but with McCoy died perhaps the greatest chance of learning the truth about the infamous D.B. Cooper. The Cooper case remained open, but over the years grew cold. 6 years after McCoy's death in 1980, a young boy stumbled upon a fascinating discovery while camping with his family in Washington State near the Columbia River. Bank records confirmed that these were, in fact, fragments of $5,800 of the $200,000 ransom paid to Cooper. Geologists claimed the money had not been hidden, but landed and was buried there naturally over time. A surge of interest in the case brought investigators to the area, but new clues would never be found. The eruption of Mount St. Helens a few months later buried the entire area in a thick coating of ash. To some, this finding confirmed the belief that Cooper, whoever he was, died in the fall over Washington. But to others, the discovery of the money only helps to prove motive. If D.B. Cooper survived the fall but lost hold of the money in midair, he would have all the more reason to want to try the stunt again.
Dan Cooper and Richard McCoy are probably the same guy. The sketch of Dan Cooper, of D.B. Cooper, put alongside the picture of Richard McCoy is almost identical. Physically, age, height, weight, nearly identical. Both of them wore brown suits, dark tie, wigs, wraparound sunglasses. Both hijacked 727s. Both of them hid in the back of the plane, pushed the passengers to the front. Both of them used flight schedules to write their notes on.
Richard McCoy and D.B. Cooper's legacy changed aircraft design. In response to the hijackings, engineers redesigned the rear exit stairs in Boeing 727s to prevent them being opened in midair. The device they created was called the Cooper Vane. The legend of D.B. Cooper and the mystery of Richard McCoy will likely live on for decades to come.